Russia has launched a fresh massive wave of attacks on Kyiv in the early hours of Tuesday. This after Moscow fired a barrage of missiles in a rare daytime attack on the Ukrainian capital. Russia has now launched a total of 17 air attacks on the Ukrainian capital. This month, that too. Kyiv says that most of the Russian missiles were shot down. A senior Ukrainian military official has now vowed to take swift action against Russia. To talk more on this and the latest Russian attacks on Kyiv and Kyiv's anticipated counteroffensive, we're now being joined by Glenn Dessen, who is a professor of international relations and is joining us live from Norway. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, Professor. Now, Glenn, this is the 17th Russian attack on Kyiv just this month. Do you think Moscow is stepping up its pressure on Ukraine ahead of Kyiv's anticipated counteroffensive?
Definitely. I mean, both sides are currently planning an offensive. So one of the objectives here is obviously to destroy the chances of a successful Ukrainian offensive by striking military targets within Ukraine, then also Kyiv, and then destroying the weapons that NATO has sent. And of course, the Russians are giving priority to destroying air defense systems in order to be able to control the skies to a greater extent and use their air force, with the American Patriot missile system obviously being a key target. And it appears that they have taken out 2 of the 3 batteries already. But second, there's also a Russian offensive, which has been planned. The Russians have mobilized. The ground is becoming dry, and this offensive is likely to happen now in the next few weeks. So these strikes can be interpreted as a sign of preparation for this offensive of their own.
When you speak of the weapons supplied by NATO and the Western countries to Ukraine, now Kyiv says that it has shot down 11 ballistic missiles and 20 drones. Do you see this as a sign that Ukraine's air defenses are now working and are extremely capable of thwarting Russian missiles, especially with Kyiv receiving weapons from the West and also training its troops using F-16 fighter jets?
Well, the Ukrainians have been supplied with a lot of air defenses from the NATO countries. So obviously there's some capabilities there, but some of this conflict with the Pentagon's own reports, which were leaked earlier on a few weeks ago, which said that the air defense systems of Ukraine were almost completely destroyed with very little left. So it's very difficult to build up that capability again because you need many components. But this is kind of the problem. It's quite possible what they're saying is correct, but it's unclear what's being intercepted because on one hand, you see the Russians using very cheap drones often to exhaust this expensive Ukrainian interceptive missiles. But then you also have this fog of war. It's difficult to confirm anything because on one side you have only Russian claims, on the other side you have Ukrainian and NATO claims, but it's very difficult to corroborate anything. And so far it's shown that all the different sides are, not telling the truth at all times. So it's difficult to assess what is correct.
And just this morning, even Zelensky praised the American Patriot missile, saying that it has a 100% interception rate.
I've seen videos of the Patriot system launching barrage like 20-30 missiles attempting to strike one of the Russian Kinzhal, which then reaches the target and destroys the Patriot missile system. So that's probably not correct. But again, this is not unique to the Ukrainian sides. There's also evidence that the Russian side also tends to twist the truth at times. So again, this is the fog of war. But I think it's important to note that this escalation really, it's because it is an escalation. The Russians haven't really attacked Kyiv just to this extent yet. So it demonstrates how the situation is escalating very quickly.
But also talk to us about why has Russia increased its attack on the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, and if it has, why now?
It could be because both countries are preparing this offensive of their own, but it's also an indication, I think, of escalation because as we've seen over the past few weeks, the British have been sending ammunition with depleted uranium, which Russia said was a red line. The British are supplying long-distance weapons, also a red line. Then you had the attack on the Kremlin by the Ukrainians with drones, again, another red line. And now NATO are sending F-16. So there is this mutual escalation, and in response to this, it's possible that the Russians are no longer restricting themselves on attack on Kyiv, and in return, the Ukrainians will probably now begin to attack Moscow as well. So there is this mutual escalation, and it's quite difficult. It's quite problematic because no one actually has escalation dominance in terms of being able to escalate and de-escalate. So it's a very dangerous situation where we're currently in.
So Russia's third attack on Kyiv in the last 24 hours, that too. Looking at the on-ground situation, can we expect more such attacks from Moscow in the coming few days or weeks?
Definitely, at least until these offensives have been launched on each side, because it's important to remember that this war is not primarily fought about territory. Like you take one territory and the war is over. It's effectively a war of attrition. That means both sides, well, NATO and Ukraine on one side, the Russians on the other, are attempting to exhaust the other. So then in a war of attrition, it's not necessarily measured in territory. It's destroying the military capabilities as well as the manpower of the opposing sides. So from this perspective, I think that as an offensive is coming, it means very little unless the enemy's capabilities are reduced or destroyed. So I think both sides will seek to attack each other's military facilities. And so I think Kyiv, which so far has been to some extent off target, or the Russians have struck before, but they haven't gone this hard after it, I think these days might be over.
Russia launched a daytime attack on Kyiv. It's extremely rare for Russia to do that. Do you see this as Russia changing its tactics in the ongoing war?
It could be. Well, regarding the day attacks, I guess that also caught Kyiv by surprise, which is also can be dangerous for the civilians. Of course, they're suffering greatly in this. Well, luckily the Soviet-era metro systems are providing some shelter. But regarding a new tactic, I think that we might be seeing it, because the Russians are rolling out a whole new means of weapons. First of all, as I mentioned, the glide bombs are proving to be quite devastating on the front line, but also because the air defenses of Ukraine has been degraded, especially outside the capital. We see that the Russians are now to a greater extent using its air force, which we haven't seen yet. And lastly, with this huge new mobilized army, which is now somewhere between 500 and 700,000 men, I think we might be seeing a huge change in the war, not just the weapons being used, but also once, again, in a war of attrition, once the adversary has been degraded enough, that's when you would go for the territory. So I think that we might see a lot of changes and a new stage of the war, if you will, begin quite soon.
Absolutely. We'll have to wait and see what lies ahead in the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war. But thank you so much for joining us on WION and sharing your insights with us. Thanks very much.